Okay, well, so everybody's getting their seats. Well, welcome everyone to NAED in Orlando. We're going to get started on our first session this morning, and my name is Bob Segal. I am a principal at a consulting firm based in Chicago. We are Frank Lynn & Associates. We have been around for quite a while, about 45 years. Our focus is on working with manufacturers and distributors to build stronger partnerships. A lot of the work we do is around strategy work, so we're trying to understand the future, where end customers are going, where contractors are going, where industrial firms are going, and translate the changes in their behavior to things that the manufacturers and distributors need to work on together. So we do a lot of work in B2B industries, business to business. So industrial's big for us, construction's big for us, technology. Those are some of the markets that we work in. We've done work with NAED in the past on a number of different topics. This topic of the changing sales model came up late last year, early this year, and a lot of this was about really driven by e-commerce. Some of the concern was if more and more customers, end customers, industrial buyers, contractors buy online, what's the impact of that on the distributor sales force? I mean, going to an extreme conclusion, if everybody buys everything online, do we need a sales force? Are they just, as a customer, just going to buy online? But the NAED and the Research Council, the CAP Council, recognize that there are other factors as well, such as changing demographics and changing buying behavior among customers. So what would be the impact of these changes on the distributor sales force in the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years? So I looked at this in discussion with the NAED, and I said, this is actually a complex topic. There are other factors. Where's the economy going? Where are technology, sales and marketing technologies going? And I said, this is not something where you can just look at past trends and extrapolate them straight line. You can't, this isn't something where you can just get a bunch of data and do like a regression analysis and say, oh, well, here's what the future will be. The sales force is definitely going to look like this. This is a very uncertain topic. And I said, we've dealt with these in the past by using a technique called scenario planning. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with that as a forecasting methodology. But scenario planning says, look, it is an uncertain future. Rather than trying to come up with throwing darts at a dartboard and saying there's one thing that we're going to bet on, scenarios look at a wide variety of factors and try and rate those in terms of probability, a likelihood of happening, and the impact of them happening. Look at which factors come to the top and try and draw out 2 or 3 or 4 different scenarios of what the future might look like. And look at some benchmarks or some signposts that say, oh, over time, I think it's really going to be this one, not that one. So at the end of the presentation today, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm actually going to present 4 different scenarios. They're not, exact opposites of each other. It's what is the driving force that's likely to shape the distributor sales model of the future. And and I'm going to tell you that you should watch these 4 over the next year or so and see which of them you think, or possibly even some combination of them, is coming true. So before I get to that, so that's kind of the tease, which is at the end, I'm going to present to you the 4 scenarios. But I'm going to take you through the process that we went through and all the factors we looked at so you understand all the underlying factors that are driving these. So it's kind of like the sausage making, right? You get into the details. It's not necessarily all that fun to look at, but we're going to build up to what these scenarios are, okay? So the project involved, as I said, coming up with scenarios, predictive scenarios of what the sales model might look at so that distributors can get a better idea of what's likely to drive their sales force decisions. And so we had a number of deliverables. What are the key factors driving the scenarios? What are some of the technologies that are going to need to support the sales force? How big of a sales force will we need? And things like that. So that's essentially what the project involved. So at a very high level, the objectives as we framed them were first around the size of the sales organization. So are we going to need fewer salespeople in the future, fewer field salespeople? Will we need maybe more inside salespeople or more marketing people to develop and maintain the website? Or are we going to need more salespeople? So under what scenario could that possibly happen? The other thing we would look at would be the skills and the mix of the sales organization. So regardless of whether we need more or fewer field salespeople or inside salespeople, what's their skill set going to have to be? And again, what's the ratio between field, inside, counter people, and even website? So that's the kind of the big goal that we're looking for, and there are other factors as well, but that's kind of what we're looking for in the project. So as I said, we're going to be making some sausage here. So the first ingredient is to look at the economy. Now, I actually, way back when, 30-something years ago, used to be an economist. I studied economics in school, have a degree in it, worked in it, and realized these guys are crazy. It's impossible to predict the economy. You can predict a few months out, but that's about it. Having said that, the economy is a major driving factor in any scenario. I mean, we can come up with any scenario, and if the economy just takes off or it tanks or whatever, a lot of the other things are out the door. So we need to look at macroeconomics. So when we look at macroeconomics, I'm going to present some data that I think is baseline that I think we're going to use for the scenarios. But of course, if there's some other economists that you like, if there are, depending on what happens tomorrow, we could have a number of different things going on here, and we try to look at the variability of the economy as one of the major factors. First, just looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts together an annual forecast, and I'm using them as one of my baselines. And to describe what's happened in the past, they've definitely seen, and I think everybody has seen here, a tepid recovery from the big recession in 2007, 2008. Nevertheless, and you can read your political leanings one way or another into any reading of the economy, but the jobless rate has fallen. The economy has grown, but not by a great amount. And the actual forecast from the BLS is the economy still will grow, but at a slower rate than it had grown before the recession. So they're looking at several years in the scenario time frame, the next 5 years, they are looking at generally modest growth. And you can see that that is one of 3 factors we're going to look at, and that we're going to assume for the baseline for the scenario, which is somewhere around 2.2% growth in the overall economy. Now, of course, you're not necessarily dealing with the overall economy. You're going to focus more on, depending on how broad your focus is, residential or multifamily or larger buildings or industrial or whatever your end markets are. And this isn't the whole presentation, I didn't want to bring out all kinds of economic data, but when you get below the macro level, you still see kind of modest growth. I'm going to point out in a few places some areas of higher growth. So for example, single family homes are expected to grow at higher than the economy, picking up for the lag of the last 10 years or so. But they're forecast to grow at about 7.7%. So there are pockets of above average growth. But as we try and look at this from a bigger picture, the future of the sales force, should you be looking to trim your sales force in terms of its size, or got to desperately find more people? The answer is you're probably going to have to find, at least based on the economy alone, we'll get to other factors, maybe a few more people, or if you can be more productive with the people you have, you're going to have about the same size sales force based on the macro economy, because we're expecting modest growth. Now again, if you don't like that, filter that into your own economic forecast with everything else I give you, but that's what we're looking at. The second factor that makes you a little bit nervous is there's long-term structural problems in the economy. So we've got, on the bottom left, you see a chart there that looks at the debt load of the US economy. So it's peaked obviously in the last few years and probably is not going to come down. Again, I don't want to get into this discussion of politics and taxes and all of that. I'm sure we would probably have a good discussion on that. But the forecast is that there are structural issues in the debt where it's probably going to remain high, which is a challenge because on the right-hand side, you see that we've got a lot of infrastructure issues. I mean, physical infrastructures around highways and bridges and things like that, which actually require a lot of electrical product. And it would be nice to have to hire more salespeople to go out to sell to all those new infrastructure projects. So one of the big unknowns as we look at scenarios is if the economy is going to grow modestly, is there some way that we can deal with the debt to fund infrastructure? Again, a lot might depend on tomorrow, but there's a big argument to be made that if you are going to use debt financing to spend on something, infrastructure is a good thing to spend it on because it actually generates returns, as opposed to spending it on something which is for immediate consumption. So if that can be worked out, then perhaps the modest growth, at least for the industry, might not be so modest. So that's a second variable, is a negative turning into a positive. If we can figure out a way with the current debt limit to actually put more money into infrastructure, that would actually be a good thing, at least for an electrical distributor. And the third is looking at very macro at the world economy. Again, trying to avoid politics, but there's a lot of debate going on about how much world trade there should be. And how do I skate through the politics of this? As an economist, most economists still agree that world trade is a good thing. Overall, it's a net positive. Obviously, with the Pacific Trade Pact kind of being stalled, will that get through Congress? Will there be changes to that? We actually saw Europe and Canada actually found a way to get a trade agreement. So, again, you can filter in however you want. I think what we're looking at here is that world trade will continue, and that there will be, but we see that there's a potential for a downside on that, depending on the politics around the world. So that's how do you translate that all the way down to your sales force is maybe a leap, but we're trying to look at all these big macroeconomic factors. So the net of the economic factors is, I think that overall our scenarios are based on modest economic growth with a high number of risks, but that we're going to assume that its impact on the sales force is going to be not the major factor. But benchmarks to watch, if you do see that the economy's obviously growing bigger, if you do see that debt spending is somehow we've gotten through roadblocks and actually funding infrastructure projects, if you do see trade pacts being passed, those are all signs that, in 2 or 3 years, because it's got to filter through the economy, you might think that, hey, business is going to increase higher than I thought. I might need larger sales force. But at the moment, the scenarios are based on about the same, if just slightly higher, based on economics.